Welcome to our today's presentation on computer studies 451/1, that is the theory paper. I'm your facilitator today, and my name is Angela Musyoki. Welcome. So to start, we are going to look at the nature of the paper. This paper consists of two sections. We have section A and we have section B. Section A consists of 40 marks, and section B, we have 60 marks. Now, what should the candidate do before he or she starts to answer the question? He or she should read the instructions carefully. The instructions are on the first page. That's where you should be reading your instructions so that you get to know what the paper requires of you. These instructions informs the candidates on the sections in the paper. As I have said earlier, we have two sections. That is section A, which is compulsory, comprising of 15 questions, 40 marks. And we have section B, whereby we have another compulsory question, which is question 16. Then in section B, we have 4 other questions, whereby the candidate is expected to choose 3 out of 4 questions. So before you start to answer the paper again, what should you do? You should actually go through the paper and check the questions that have been asked so that you gain some confidence in answering your questions. Let's look at the terms that are used in testing. The first term is name. In naming, you are supposed to give points. Again, you can be given to name a labeled part in a certain diagram. The other term that is used in asking of the questions is state. In state, you are supposed to give meaningful statements. Another term is identify. Identify, mostly you are naming a labeled part. Like for example, in this diagram, you can see that the diagram is drawn there. And then there's the part labeled A, and there's the part labeled B. In the questions, you are supposed, question 1, to identify the topology. And in this case, this is Amber's topology. Then again, another term that is used in testing is define. In define, you are given the meaning of words that have been given or the meaning of phrases that have been given. The other term that is used in testing is determine. And in determine, you are finding a solution to a problem. Like for example, in a question testing you from data representation in a computer, whereby you are told to determine the value of 2 numbers that have been subtracted using either 1's complement or 2's complement. The other term is explain. And in explain, you are given a point, and you are supposed to say more information about it. Or rather, we can talk of giving more details about a given point. Then describe, giving procedures, or there you are supposed to be giving processes. The other term is illustrate. Illustrate, you are supposed to use a correctly labeled diagram or diagrams, and that again, you can add explanations. Another term is differentiate or distinguish. Here, you are given the differences of two given terms. Like for example, if you are told to differentiate between a compiler and an interpreter, then differences of those two must come out clearly on both sides in order for the candidate to score that point right. Again, when you are differentiating, you are supposed to differentiate at a common point. For example, in our case of differentiating between a compiler and an interpreter, like one of the differences is that compilers are faster than translators. Then you are supposed to differentiate at a common point. Another point, let's say like you are differentiating using memory, whereby a compiler requires a lot of memory and an interpreter requires less memory. That's a correct point. But you cannot differentiate by saying that a compiler requires a lot of memory and an interpreter is, let's say, like fast or what. You are supposed to differentiate at a common point. Another term is with aid of a diagram. When you are given a question whereby you are told with aid of a diagram, with the aid of a diagram, like for example, with the aid of a flowchart, describe a loop control structure. In this case, the candidate is supposed to draw a diagram, label it, and then give an explanation or more information about the diagram that you have drawn. Then we have another term that is outline. In outline, you are supposed to give the chronological order of events, the way the steps are supposed to follow one another, the way the events are supposed to follow one another. Like, for example, if you are told to give the stages of program development, the stages should follow each other in the correct order, from the first stage to the last stage. The point where you start mixing the stages, that point you start scoring wrong. So the stages should flow in order from number 1 to the second stage, to the third one, all the way to the last stage. Then those are some of the terms. Then next, we are looking at techniques of answering questions. The first technique that I would advise candidates to do is to start by answering the easier questions first. Why? When you start by answering the easier questions first, this one gives you some level of confidence because you know, at least you know something in that paper, and then you have a lot of confidence even to approach the other questions which might seem to be challenging to you. Then another technique when you are answering questions in the exam is that you are supposed to give the required number of points. Like for example, if you are told state 3, you are supposed to give exactly 3. Giving more points, let's say like giving 5 points, it might be a waste of time because the points that are required are only 3. So it's advisable to candidates that they should start by giving their strong points first, because if you give 5, only the first 3 are considered, the rest are ignored. The other technique of answering your questions is that you avoid the use of don't in answering your questions. Like for example, in a case where you are told to give the differences between the graphical user interface and the command line interface. Like for example, this is a candidate who says, graphical user interface is user-friendly, and on the side of command line, the candidate says the command line is not, or it's not user-friendly. That is not a correct answer. If it is not user-friendly, then what it is? The candidate should say command line, the graphical user interface is user-friendly, and on the side of command line, you should say it is difficult to remember commands in the command line interface. So you should avoid the word don't or not, because you should actually say the real point in that answer. Then again, you should avoid incomplete or hanging answers. If it's a statement that you are writing, write as complete statement. And again, if your answer needs some level of qualifying your answer, you should be able to qualify your answer so that you are able to score a point there. Another technique in answering your questions, because definitely in our paper, that's 451/1, sometimes or you will be required to do calculations. Like, for example, a question from the data representation in a computer whereby you are told to perform the following calculation using 1's complement or using 2's complement, or maybe you are converting a number from one number system to another. You are supposed to outline or to show all your steps clearly. The steps should start from the first step all the way to the last step. Don't do your calculation in your mind and put down the answer, because at that point you might miss some marks that are meant for some steps. So it is always good to outline all the steps or all the procedures of your calculation properly. Then in question 16, in a case of an algorithm that is either a flowchart or a pseudocode that will require you as a candidate to give an output, it is actually advisable that the candidate writes a dry run, which is of great importance. A dry run is actually like a process again that shows where you are starting from all the way to the last step where you are required to get your answer. Again here, don't dry run a flowchart or a pseudocode in your mind and then you give the answer. You are supposed to show how are you getting to the final answer. That is, how are you getting to the output that is required in that algorithm, that is a pseudocode or a flowchart. Again, another technique is a question where you are given a case, a diagram, or a table. The candidate is supposed to base the answer in that table or that diagram. Like, for example, looking at this diagram in our case, that says that this figure, that is figure 4, shows an advert that is placed in a newspaper. And then you are told to use it to answer the questions that follow. So when you read this advert, you are seeing that there are new arrivals of laptop computers. The specs are, you have the HDD, 300 GB, there's RAM, there's 512 MB, that is 512 MB. The clock speed is given. We have optical drives, we have that DVD, we have the screen, which is 17 inches. And you are told there are other PCs that are available. But on the other side of the table, that's on column 2, you're also given other specs, like the operating system is Windows 8 Home Edition. There are other programs, that is free suite, which is word processor, spreadsheets. There's also DTP, and there's a presentation software, there's internet browser, there's email, and then there's the presence of keyboard, mouse, modem, and parallel port, USB port, and serial port. Then the questions are as follows. State the software package in the free suite, which is most suitable for each of the following. Like, for example, computing gadgets. When we get back to our table, when we look at the free suite where we have the word processors and the rest, the right answer here for the application that is suitable for computing budgets is spreadsheets. As a candidate, because you know different examples of spreadsheets, like there's Excel and the rest, at this point, the table has given you spreadsheets. It has not given you the examples of spreadsheets. So the right answer here is spreadsheets. What is on the table, not the Excel and other examples of spreadsheets. Again, like here when we have creating budgets, like the example here that is used in the table is word processor. You should not start by saying Microsoft Word and other examples of word processors. The correct answer here is word processor. The next one is designing brochures, and whatever is given here in our advert is DTP. So that is the correct answer that you are supposed to give based on the table that is given. So the next what you can also use to answer questions is that the candidate can give acronyms. And these acronyms are standard acronyms, the ones that are accepted. The candidate is not supposed to start by creating his own acronyms. So let's say, like, for example, in a question like, explain 3 coding schemes used in computing. Let's say, like, there's this candidate who says BCD, and there's another one you said binary coded decimal. All those 2 are correct. BCD is accepted. ASCII is also accepted. EBCD, it's also right. And then after you state those ones, now you move on and you start giving more explanations on the BCD. You give more explanation on the ASCII, and you also give more explanations on the EBCD. Okay? So that now you are able to score. Let's say, like, for example, this is a question that can be awarded 6 marks, each point 2 marks, whereby you state the coding scheme and then the explanation. Stating BCD, you explain, it uses the number of bits are these, you state ASCII, you give the number of bits, you state the other one, which is EBCD, and then you give the number of bits. At that point, you are correct. Again, if you are also comfortable with giving full names, you can as well do so because you are also right. Then I would also like to advise candidates on the part that is choice of questions in section B. This part requires a lot of proper analysis. Question 17, 18, 19, and 20. You are supposed to choose 3 out of those 4. As a candidate, it's not good to start answering just the questions before doing an analysis of which questions you find good for you and which question do you find more challenging. I would advise the candidate to leave the question that is challenging. So you should check question 17, how many marks can I score this? Question 18, the same, how many marks am I able to score? Question 19, how many marks am I able to score? And question 20, how many marks am I able to score? So in that case, out of those 4 questions, you will find that there is one of the questions that you might be in a position to score low marks in that question. It is my advice that that question that you are likely to score less marks, avoid it. Do the 3 questions that you are comfortable with. As a candidate, don't see that like question 17, you know section A, which is just 2 marks. And then the rest you don't know. And then because you know 17, 2 marks, you start answering that. That is not advisable. It is always good to go to answer the questions that you are comfortable with in section B. Now, in case you answer all the questions in section B, that is in case you answer 17, you answer 18, you answer 19, and you also answer 20. Still do an analysis, and then you cancel the question that you don't intend to be marked. What will happen if you answer all the questions? Question 20 will not be considered. The first 3, that is 17, 18, and 19, are the ones that are going to be considered in the final score. So it is always good to know that you are supposed to do 3 questions. That is 17, 18, 19, and 23 questions out of that, which will give you 45, plus the 15 of question 16, that gives you 60, plus the 40 of question A, that gives you 100%. Then another technique as you answer or as you put down your points, avoid writing the same answer in different words. Let's say like point 1, you are saying this one, and point 2, you put the same answer in different words. Let's say like an example of this question. State 2 reasons for the increased use of laptop computers in government offices. One of the correct answers is that laptop computers are portable. That's point 1. What if you say in point 2 that laptop computers are easy to carry? That is one and the same point. So avoid writing the same point in different words, because that's what we call repetition. You are just repeating the same point but using different wordings. Another technique is that you are supposed to avoid breaking one point into many points. Like, for example, in such a question like, state the causes of fire in a computer laboratory. One causes of fire in a computer laboratory is what we call electrical faults. Electrical faults is it's a phrase that has so many other points that you can break into. Like, for example, if we talk of overloaded sockets, if we talk of naked wires, those are all electrical faults. So if you put, let's say, like 0.1 naked wires, 0.2, you say overloaded sockets. That's just 1 point. So don't break down your 1 point into so many other points, which can also mean which are also carried on the point that you have put at the first one. Then let's now move on to another thing. What are the topics that can be tested in the exam? This is just the syllabus of computer studies. We have Form 1 syllabus, whereby we have the first topic, which is Introduction to Computers. In Introduction to Computers, we have definition of terms. We have other things like we have the generation of computers. We have classification of computers. From there, we move on to the computer laboratory, whereby we have the safety measures, and then we have again the measures that are meant to protect the users, and measures that are meant to protect the computers. Then still on that, we move on to practical hands-on skills, whereby we look at the booting of a computer. Those are aspects that you should understand as a candidate. Booting of a computer, the computer keyboard. We also have mouse skills. Then from there, we have the second topic, which is computer systems. Computer systems here, we're going to look at the elements of a computer system, which are the software, hardware, and the computer user. Majorly here, when we look at the first things that are covered there, it is now the hardware, categories of hardware, basically the input, output, central processing unit, and the secondary storage devices, which carries a lot, and every candidate is supposed to understand what is in that, and any question can be tested from all that. Then we also move in still in the computer system, you must understand what we call the computer software, the categories of computer software, which are the application software and the system software. You must understand all that. Everything that is contained in that topic, you must be able to understand and answer a question that is tested in that topic. Then next, we have the operating system, definition of the operating system, the resources under the operating system control. Again, we have the functions of the operating system. We have the classification of the operating system. We have how Windows organizes information, like there we have the factors that determines how an operating system organizes information. Then from there, we move on to files. There's much about files. Then we move on to folders. Then again, you should also be able to understand how they operate the managing files and folders using the operating system, like the aspects of naming, there's the aspects of copying, moving, and many, many other aspects. Then the other part of the operating system that you should also be able to understand is also now the disk management using the operating systems. Under disk management using the operating system, there are the aspects of formatting. What's disk formatting? The partitioning of a disk. What's compression? What's scanning of a disk? And in scanning, you know that we can scan for viruses, and we can also scan for minor errors and disk-related problems, and many, many other disk management functions that are done by the operating system. So if you know all that in Form 1 work, then you are a prepared candidate. Then now again, we move on to the Form 2 syllabus. In Form 2 syllabus, there is the application theory. The application theory, these are the 4 applications that you learn. These applications are only not tested in the practical dimension, but they are also tested theoretically. Like, for example, you can get a question from a word processor, concepts of word processor, all the way from the introduction, advantages, the formatting, which encompasses the text formatting, paragraph formatting, page formatting, all that you need to understand as a candidate. Again, issues to do with mail merge. Again, issues to do with inserting graphics. You also need to understand the theory that is there. Again, issues to do with printing. You need to understand issues to do with the printing. Another application application question that can be tested can also come from spreadsheets. Spreadsheets, there's a lot that you need to understand there as a candidate. Like, for example, the introduction of spreadsheets, that is definition of spreadsheets, definition of terms, components of a spreadsheet. You need to know about the data types that are used in spreadsheets. And as a learner, at this point, you are not supposed to confuse the data types that are used in spreadsheets and the data types that are used in databases. You need to understand very well which are these data types that are used in spreadsheets and which are these other data types that are used in databases. Like spreadsheets, we have only 4 data types, which is we have the label, we have the formula, we have the function, and many, many others. So you are supposed to understand all those data types. Again, you are supposed to understand the formulas and functions. How do you write a formula? How do you write a function? How? And again, the cell referencing. Remember, when you are writing a formula or a function in spreadsheets, we always use the cell references. We don't use the actual values. Cell references are the ones that are allowed to be used in a formula or a function. Again, in this case, you should also understand the syntax. Then from there, we move on to databases and application theory again, whereby you can be tested on the definition of terms that are used in databases, database models, database objects, queries, and what have you. Queries, reports, forms, and all that. So you need to understand all that in the database. Then from databases, we move on to DTP, whereby you are supposed to understand all the aspects of DTP, starting with the definition, types, and terms used in DTP. Mostly here, they're the terms that are used in manipulating a graphic. And again here, you should also understand the icons that are also used in manipulating a graphic. Like there was a certain year whereby there was testing an icon for text wrap, whereby the candidate was required to name the icon and to state the function. So as a candidate, you should know all that. Then again, we have a topic of data security, which is a common topic that you should also understand as a candidate. Issues to do with data security and how data can be protected against unauthorized access. Then next we have the internet and email. There's still a lot of theory in internet and email that a candidate should be able to understand. You can get a question from internet and email. Then that's all about Form 2 work. Then we move on to Form 3. What questions can you get from the Form 3 syllabus or Form 3 work? You should prepare yourselves on data representation. From the introduction of data representation, then definition of terms, you should be able to prepare yourself. Then you should be able to prepare yourselves on the number systems. Which are these number systems that you should prepare? All of them. You should be able to prepare the binary, the decimal, and others. You should also be able to prepare about the advantages of binary and other things that you should also be able to prepare yourselves on. That is conversions, converting from one number system to another. Calculations are also major in this area, whereby you are expected as a candidate to be able to do binary arithmetic, that is binary subtraction using the direct method. You should also be able to do the binary addition using the direct method. Again, here you should also be able to do the Subtraction using one's complement, and again subtraction using two's complement. And in that case, as a candidate, you should be able to know at which point do I ignore the overflow, and at which point do I add the overflow back to the answer. Like in one's complement, when you are doing the binary subtraction using the one's complement, if you happen to have an overflow bit in your answer, that overflow bit is added back to the answer. But in two's complement, if your calculation has an overflow bit, you are supposed to ignore that overflow. As a candidate, you should understand that. Again, in data processing, you are supposed to know about the coding schemes. As a candidate, be able to know the 3 coding schemes, how many bits do they use to represent data, and many other information on that. Then we have a point here, another topic, elementary programming principles. This is a topic that is majorly tested in question 16, whereby you are expected to give some questions can be in the form of theory, and others can be in the form of the algorithms, that is the pseudocodes and the flowcharts. Another topic that is of great concern in Form 3 that you should also prepare on is system development, starting with the definition of the system, characteristics of a system, and information system. Why do we need to develop, or what leads to the development of a new system? Then you should be able to know all that, theories of system development, and again, the stages of system development. What happens at each stage of system development? As a candidate, you should be able to know all that, such that when a question is tested from any of those stages of system development, you are able to tackle it. Then now that's all about Form 3. Then now we move on to Form 4 syllabus. Which are the topics in Form 4? You need to know about the data communication, definition of terms, advantages of networking. You need to know issues about the communication media. You also need to know issues to do with the network operating system, that is under networking software. And you also need to know issues to do with the topologies, the advantages of topologies, the disadvantages of topologies, how to describe which of those topologies, how can you represent those topologies in a diagram, and the parts that are in those topologies. Like, for example, the one that we have seen before, whereby you are required to answer or to name, like this one. In this case, as a candidate, where you are required to identify the parts. This is a question from data communication and networking. This is a topology, a bus topology. Like part B, where you were supposed to name, which is a terminator. So as a candidate, if you have read about topologies, you are able to name that part. Again, you can be asked about the functions of those parts. So now, after that topic, we have the next topic in Form 4, which is the application areas of ICT. You should be able to answer a question from application areas of ICT, whereby as a candidate in this area, a question that tests you from application areas of ICT. This is a question that you should answer, and your answer should contain these 2 points. As you are answering, you should check whether does your point or does your answer contain the use and technology. If your answer does not contain those 2, then it's not a good answer. It's not a right answer. So the right answer in this area, application areas of ICT, should show the use and the technology. Like, for example, how are the computers used during voting process? So you can say, like, they are used to register candidates, they are used to register voters by use of biometrics. Actually, the use is registering, and the technology is biometrics. So the answer should imply the use and the technology. That's when your answer is right. Then you should also know about the effects of ICT. That's also something that a candidate you should prepare on. And finally, you should also be able to give the careers opportunity in ICT and be able to also show, let's say like for example, what are the functions of a database administrator? You should be able to state those functions. What are the functions of a network administrator? As a candidate, you should be able to give the functions of those people, let's say like those specialists, database administrator, network administrator, all those you should be able to give. Then in our question, you should also expect questions on emerging trades in ICT. Like for example, now I'm presenting to you using Zoom. Zoom is an emerging trade in ICT. So let's say like, for example, what are the advantages of using Zoom to teach students? You should be able to answer that question. It's an emerging trade in ICT. Another question can also be tested from your daily experiences in the process of interacting with the computers. Like for example, there was this question whereby the candidates were told that the computer is not, in sleep mode, but the hard disk light is blinking. What could be the possible reason for the hard disk light to be blinking? So as a candidate, you should now be able to know. You have interacted with the computer. Like what can make the hard disk light to be blinking? Let's say like there are some background activities that are running the computer. Like for example, there's a network access that's taking place. Like for example, there's a virus that is executing itself. Those are some of the background activities. Those are some of the activities that can be running and the computer is on sleep mode. So you should be able to know those daily experiences that you see as you interact with the computer. Then let's now look at some of the sample questions that can be tested and how can you approach them. So to start with, I'm going to sample question 16 and then we move on. Like for example, possible questions from question that can be tested in question 16. A question on elementary programming theory, like state, give the advantages, all that, define, all that. Like for example, state two language translators, like those are two translators, whereby you can be able to give. Again, let's say like, for example, you can be given a language that is written in assembly language, like something that's written in mnemonics. And then you are told to identify the programming language that was used to write that program. Then you should be able to identify that the assembly language that was written, that was used to write that program. So you should expect some theory from that topic, that is the elementary programming. Then again, what else as a candidate should you expect in question 16? Drawing a flowchart can also be tested. Like you are given a scenario whereby you are told this one happens like this. Like for example, there's this question that was tested whereby there was a company that was giving traveling allowance to its employees, whereby each of the employee was given 200 shillings, but those who used private means are supposed to be given 100 shillings extra. And then you are told to design a flowchart that can be used to determine the employee's travel allowance. As a candidate, you should be able to draw that flowchart. Then again, you expect a question that can be, you are told to design a pseudocode. When you are given a scenario, like the one that I've given above of a company giving allowances, traveling allowances to its employees, and then you are told to design or write a pseudocode. You are supposed to be able to write a pseudocode. Then there are other questions like changing a flowchart to a pseudocode. In this case, where you are supposed to change a flowchart to a pseudocode, this question you are supposed only to remove the symbols, and then again now you write the pseudocode. But as you are removing the symbols here, you are expected to know the control structure that is used so that you can apply it at the point where the control structure comes in your pseudocode. Then you can also be told to change a pseudocode to a flowchart. At this point, when you are told to change a pseudocode to a flowchart, this is now giving your statements symbols, whereby you will have the symbols and you will have the text inside the symbols. Again, here, as you are putting the symbols and the text, you should also be keen on the control structure. Because at this point, if the control structure is used and you don't use it correctly, you end up losing a mark for logic, because your flowchart at that point loses logic. On the same point, when you are writing a pseudocode, changing a pseudocode to a flowchart, again, make sure that the control structure is well put. Again, we have the determining of the output, whereby earlier I said that a dry run, written dry run. At this point, you can use a table whereby you can write the variables in different columns, and then now you start to dry run your flowchart as you write down the variables, the way they are changing. You write down them the way they are changing from one point to the next. Determining of the output here, you should know that sometimes there's a flowchart that will have an output. There's an algorithm that's a flowchart or a pseudocode that will have an output within the loop. If the output is within the loop, remember that you are going to give several outputs. But if the output is outside the loop, you are only going to give the last output. And again, I said, show us where the dry run. As teachers, give the dry run. As a candidate, write down the dry run, because the dry run is followed from the first step to the last step until you give the final output. Then lastly, you can be told to modify a flowchart or pseudocode. Basically, about the algorithms, this is what you should be able to do as a candidate. So points to note when you are designing your algorithms in your questions. There is the point of correct use of symbols at each stage. If it is start, make sure that you use the correct symbol. If it is stop, the same case. If you don't use the correct symbols, you may end up losing a mark on that point. So make sure that as a candidate, you use the correct symbols at each stage. Input symbol, processing symbol, decision symbols, and also the use of other symbols that you need to have, like the connectors. Make sure that you use them properly. Then again, as you are doing your algorithms in a question, note that it is important to have a logical flow of events. The algorithm logic comes in here. Are your events flowing in a logical manner, the way they are supposed to follow one another? Don't mix up steps, because if you mix up steps at that point, you lose a mark for logic, because your flowchart is not having logic. Make sure that you do the right thing and your flowchart has logic. The logical flow of events is seen. So how? Let's say like we should be able to see the start, should be able to see the input. The candidate should also be able to show the process, decision, output, and stop. And then the control structures. If you use them well, your flowchart will have your pseudocode, your flowchart will have a logic. If you doesn't use them well, then it means that they lose logic. So it is always good to do the correct thing as you are doing your flowchart, as you are doing your pseudocode, and as you continue to do those two. Then points to note again is the procedural dry run in case of output and output. In case of output, I've said output because at a case whereby you have one output and another case you can have several outputs that are maybe within the loop or outside the loop. Let's say like, for example, you can be able to output sum that can be outside the loop. You can also be told to output average and other variables that may require outputs. Again, if it's a number that's accumulating and you're supposed to output and it's within the loop, then the candidate there will show several outputs. Like for example, in this case of a flowchart, you can see the flowchart is there, whereby we have start, redex, then there sum is a process that in the sum, that's a process whereby sum is being initialized to a value 0. Then again, we have n that is being initialized to a value 0. Then from there, we execute the statements before we make a decision, whereby n is incremented by 1, sum is incremented by n, and then a decision is made, which is n equals to x? If it is true, the value of n equals to the value of x, then sum is going to be printed. Else, if it is not true that the value of n is not equal to the value of x, then the flowchart is going to loop. It continues to loop. To continue to loop, executing n is equals to n plus 1 and sum is equals to sum plus 1 until the value of n is equal to the value of x. Then some of the questions can be like, for example, determine the output from the flowchart if x is equals 5. Let's say like when we go back to the flowchart, whereby the value of x is read as 5. Then sum incremented, sum initialized to 0, n initialized to 0, and then n is incremented by 1, sum is incremented by n, and then n is equals to x. Remember that we have input n as 1 as 5. So you are supposed now to run this dry run, showing us how the value of n is incrementing. You show again how the value of n is incrementing until the value of n is equivalent to the value of x. And then at that point, then it is now when you display sum and then the program stops. Again, we have another scenario whereby the value of n is read as 7. Again, at this point, you should also, you can continue with the first one, because already you had reached at 5, you continue with the 6 and 7. So show how you are reaching to your final answer in this case. Still in this, write a pseudocode for the flowchart in the figure above, figure 3, this flowchart. As a candidate, you are requested or you are required to write a pseudocode. So in this case, it is very good to do your pseudocode in a sequential order of events, the way they are appearing. And in this case, it will be just removing the symbols and then writing what remains after the symbols. And then if you can check here, there is a control structure that comes in. You can see between n is equals to 0 and where we have the statement n is equals to n plus 1, you can see now there's a loop that's coming in there. In this case, in this diagram, the loop here is the repeat until the statements are being executed first and then the condition is being tested last. So in this case, you write start, read x, sum is equals to 0, n is equals to 0, then repeat should come in there. The word repeat should come in there. Repeat. Then which statements are we repeating in this case? We are repeating n is equals to n plus 1. We are also repeating the execution of statements. Sum is equals sum plus n. Then you write the condition now, which should read as until n is equals x. Until n is equals x. Then from there now you write print sum and then stop. So we have just removed the symbols and we have checked where the control structure comes in here. Like for example, there when I was saying that you can be requested to change a flowchart to a pseudocode. This scenario requires you to change this flowchart to a pseudocode. I've just said remove the symbols and look at where the control structure comes in so that you get everything, logic and the correct use of everything. So again, you can be told to modify, like I have said earlier. Like in this case, this question requires the candidate to modify the flowchart so that it can be used to get the sum of integers between 50 and 100. Going back to our flowchart, you can see we need to change the initialization of n. N should not start at 0. N should start at 50. And then we also change the condition because we are actually writing a flowchart that's going to that can be used to get the sum of integers between The word between means that it is 51 to 99. So the integers should be summed as 51, 52, all the way to 99. So again, here your decision in the decision symbol is likely to change. Again, yes, no. So what changes actually here is the initialization of n and then decision, and then we remove the read x. Read x, now here we are not reading anything. We are only modifying the flowchart to be able to output the sum of integers between 50 and 100. Another question that was also tested on that was name two programming language translators. As I have said earlier, you can be taught a theory in that, naming, giving advantages, stating, explaining, anything on that topic. So you are supposed to be able, like the two programming language translators, we have compilers, we have interpreters, and we have also the assemblers. The difference is which language do they translate. Then, now that was question 16. Another area that I would want to major on is data representation. How do you approach questions on data representation? Some of the questions in data representation can involve the following. 1, conversion of numbers between one number system and the other number system. Sometimes you can be told to give with a given number of bits. Like for example, if you convert 7, if you convert it to binary, it's going to give you 1, 1, 1. That is the binary representation of 7. Now, supposing the question requires you to give it in 6 bits. So you are supposed to give the binary representation of 7, let's say like in 6 bits, depending on what the question requires of you. Another question on this topic is direct binary additions. You are supposed to be able to add those digits, those binary digits together and get the correct answer. When you can be given two clusters, let's say like 1, 1, 1 plus 1, 0, 1, 0. You can be given a case like that, or you can be given 3 clusters and or so. So you are supposed to be able to add those binary digits and get the correct answer. There's also aspects of direct binary subtraction. Direct. If you are given 1, 0, 1, 0, you subtract 1, 0, 1. Should be able to carry that binary subtraction and get the right answer as a candidate. Another area of interest here is subtraction using one's complement. And let's say like when we're given a number, let's say like using one's complement, subtract 28 from 56. At that point again, there's a term that has been introduced there, 28 from 56. So you should rewrite the question to 56 minus 28. So the word from there should also be a point that a candidate should note. Don't just start by 28 minus 56 because it's reading 28 from 56. So 56 minus 28. So how do you approach that after writing the question is that you convert each of those numbers to the binary equivalent. Once you convert the numbers to the binary equivalent, you get the ones complement of the negative number, and then you add the 2, you add the binary equivalent of the other number to the ones complement of the negative number, and then well, if there's an overflow, you add the overflow back to the answer. If there is no overflow, then definitely that one is a negative. The answer is a negative number. So don't start asking, why is this one not having an overflow? It's a negative number. Again, the same applies now to subtraction using two's complement. Start by converting each of the given numbers. If you are given the numbers in decimal, that is in base 10, start by converting them to the binary equivalent. Then from there, you approach your question. That is, you get the ones complement of the negative number, you get the twos complement of the negative number, then you add them together. Overflow, you ignore. If there is no overflow, you just leave it because it is a negative number. If there's an overflow, it's okay. It's a positive number. Ignore. If there's no overflow, it is a negative number. So you stop at that point, and that is your correct answer. On this, let's say, like, for example, the question can be leave your answer in binary notation. At that point, when you have the binary digits, you are okay. But let's say, like, for example, you are told to give your answer in decimal notation, and you are using the ones complement, and the number is a negative number. Your answer is a negative number. What do you do, or how do you approach a question? In ones complement, your answer that you are getting, and it is a negative number, then you recomplement it to get to the original number, and then now that digits after recomplementing, it's what you convert to base 10. In twos complement, if the answer is negative and you're supposed to leave your answer in decimal notation, this is how you approach it. The answer that is in binary negative, you subtract 1 so that you get to the ones complement. And then when you are in ones complement, whatever you have, you complement it, and then after recomplementing, now you convert whatever you have got to base 10, or to the decimal number system. Then again, here you should expect other theory questions, like, for example, what are the coding schemes, advantages of binary, and even you should be able to explain the number systems. Like, for example, a question like, explain or describe the octal number systems. You should be in a position to, let's say, like, for example, mention the number of bits that are used to represent a number or a digit in octal number system. You can also be able to say, let's say, like, for example, the digits in octal number systems range from, let's say, like 0 to 7. You can also answer it, like, for example, saying that it is a number system that represents its digits in base 8. So at that point, you are okay as a candidate. So you can expect any theory question from data representation in computers. Then those are some questions that I have given them for you. Like, for example, state 3 standard coding schemes used in computing and electronic systems. You are able to say there's the ASCII, there's the BCD, and there's the EBCDIC. Those are the standard coding schemes, just stating. So at that point, the candidate, or you are okay at that point. Then convert each of the following numbers. Then you are converting 110.101 base 2 to decimal. Show the procedural conversion of the whole number part and the fraction part. How do you approach it? You multiply by their place values, and then you add them together, and then you get your answer. Question 2 on the same of issues to do with converting 12.6875 base 10. The candidate here should be able to convert either using the place value method or the long division method. You will convert 12 and give the binary equivalent of 12. Now the 0.6875, you multiply it by 2 until you get the fraction part becomes 0 or starts repeating itself. And then at that point, you read the bits downwards. So your answer will be the binary equivalent of 12 point, the binary equivalent of 6875 base 2. At that point, you will have followed all the steps, and then you get your answer right. Then, as I had said earlier, whereby you are subtracting 110.01 from 11,001.0101. So the key point here, you should be able to see the word from. So in this case, from. So this subtract this number, subtract this number, subtract this number. So you are supposed to subtract 110 point this number. You are subtracting it from this. So you are supposed to rearrange the order of these numbers. So it will be now 11,001.0101 minus 110.01. So it's a word from here is a word that it's a keyword in this question that you should not, because if as a candidate you approach it the other way around, definitely you are not going to get the right answer. Then the next question is using two's complement. Two's complement, perform the following binary arithmetic, leaving the answer in binary notation. So this one is straightforward. It's already written properly. But what do you do as a candidate? Already this one is already in binary. So the only thing using two's complement, the only thing that you are supposed to do, this number, this binary combination, you change it to one's complement, you change it to two's complement, and then what you get, you add it to these digits. So at that point, you will be able to check your answer. If there is an overflow, definitely the maximum number of bits here is 6. So if in your answer you get 6 bits, it means there is no overflow. If in your answer you get 7 bits, it means that the 7th bit to your left is an overflow. So at that point, you just ignore it. So those are some of the questions that you can get from data representation in computers. So you should be able, as a learner, as a candidate, to prepare on the data representation in computers and be able to score. If a question is tested, like for example, if it's a question on section B, and it's all about data representation, that's you should be able to get everything there and score your good marks. Another question is on application areas of ICT. I had earlier mentioned that an answer to a question from this area or from this section must show the technology and use for it to qualify as a right answer. Like for example, if you are talking of an answer like keeping records, computers be used to keep records, you should show the technology that is used to keep records. Like for example, if you are saying use of databases to keep records, that point is right. But if you just say keeping records, that point is wrong. Keeping records by use of databases programs, it's right. The use is keeping records. The technology is database. If we're talking, let's say, like computers being used in places where calculations are required, we should not just say computers are used to perform calculations. How now? Then you should be able to say computers can be used to perform calculations using spreadsheet programs. At that point, you have shown the use, which is performing calculation. You have shown the technology, which is the spreadsheet program. That point, you are okay. Then now on the questions about the application theory, which are questions from Form 2 work. Like for example, a question from spreadsheets requiring a candidate to write a formula or a function. What should you note at that point? 1, a formula or a function must start. The word must is underlined. Must start with an equal sign. Yes, any formula written without an equal sign, any function written without an equal sign, it doesn't qualify to be a right function. It doesn't qualify to be a function or a formula. So if you are writing a formula or a function, always remember to start with an equal sign. What else should you note when you are required to write a function or a formula in, let's say, like spreadsheets? Yes. Use of correct function name. If you are using function names, use the correct names. Don't create your own, or let's say like average. Don't write something like AVG. AVG is not a function name. The function name is average. So make sure that you use the correct function name. Then if you are, again, when you are using the correct function name, make sure that you enclose that or wherever you are writing the cell references of your function within the brackets. On the same note, if a formula, now we are away from function, remember functions are the inbuilt mathematical formulas that are used to perform a calculation. And again, you can use a formula that is used and defined, whereby you will use cell references and operators. Use the correct operators and also use the correct cell references. On that, for you to be able to score the right answer on the same, the syntax of writing the formula is of great importance. And then on the use of correct cell references is also of great importance. So now generally, if you'll have done that, you'll be able to score a correct answer. On this example, spreadsheet example, that figure 1, you can see there are the rows there, A, B, C, D, then the columns are there, all the way from column 1 to column 5. There's the item description. There is the number of units, cost per unit, and total costs. Then the questions from that, you are told, write a formula to calculate the total cost of rice. Total cost of rice. When you study your table there, you can see that rice is in column, in row 3. Row 3, we have the label rice. Then the number of units for rice are 6. And then the cost per unit is 145. How do you get the total cost? Know that the total cost is number of units multiplied by the cost per unit. So the number of units for rice are in cell B3, and the cost per unit of rice is it's in cell C3. So this one, you either, the question is write a formula. So in this case, you can have a formula or you can have a function, because a function is also a formula. So you can write, let's say, like for example, you can write is equals, you write the function product, and then you open the brackets, and then the cell references that are therefore multiplying the 2 so that you can get. Again, you can also write is equals the first cell where the item price is, where the item price is, let's say like it's in C2 multiplied by C3. So at that case, you are able to write the correct function. Remember, I have always stressed that a function or a formula must always start with an equal sign. So the correct function here was to be is equals product B3 is equals product B3 full colon C3, and remember the cell references are enclosed in brackets. So make sure that you remember that syntax is also important. If you don't enclose it in brackets, then at that point, you start missing the point. Then the same, if you are to write a function, sorry, that was a function, then the formula will be is equals B3 multiplied by C3. And at that point, you have your correct answer. Then there are other answers, let's say like the second question, the price of our items increased by 10% and the value 10% is placed in cell B8 using cell addresses with absolute referencing only. So where the value 10% is placed, if you are using that one in your formula, it's going to be absolutely referenced. So make sure that what is to be absolutely referenced, you put it the 10% is going to be absolutely referenced, yes. Then the others are going to be relatively referenced. So whatever is to be absolutely referenced should be absolutely referenced. Whatever is relatively referenced should be relatively referenced. Then the other one is write a function to display the number of cells in which the cost per unit is equal to 110. Actually, where you're required to write a function, it is strictly a function. You can only write a function maybe when the question is requiring you to write a formula. At that point, you can write a formula or a function. But when it's a function, strictly write a function. Like this one is mean is equals mean, and then write a function to display the number of cells in which the cost per unit is equal to 110. So at that point, you write the formula. Then write a function to display the least total cost per for all the items. So at this point, it's now when you are going to use the mean function, the minimum function. So at that point, you should also be able to write all your functions and all your formulas correctly. Then on the application theory of database concepts, like for example, this one, whereby you are required, you are given two tables. You are given two tables, that is table 1 and table 2, and you are told they are related tables in a database. Then use them to answer the questions that follow, like there's table 1, whereby we have the department code and we have the department name. Then there's table 2, whereby we have the department ID, student's registration number, and student name. In such a case, whereby the questions are like, whereby the questions are like table 1 and table 2 are related tables in a database. Use them to answer the questions. Like for example, identify the most appropriate primary key for each field. We should go back to the table. Table 1, the appropriate primary key here is department code. Table 2, the appropriate primary key is the registration number. Department code in table 2 is a foreign key. Department ID in table 2 is a foreign key, and it's the one that is you are going to use to relate your two tables. Your two tables will be related using the department code in table 1 and the department ID in table 2. Then the other question is like, for example, you are told to explain two benefits of enforcing referential integrity. When you are relating the two tables, that is the department code, and then you have the department ID. Now, the department code in table 1 is the primary key, and when you look at these two tables, table 1 is the primary table, and table 2 is the child table to table 1. As I've said that the two tables are going to be related using the department code and the department ID, and when you are creating your relationships here, it's when you enforce the referential integrity. What are the benefits of enforcing the referential integrity in your relationships? You will find, like, for example, one of the benefits is that no field that can exist in table 2 without it being first existing in table 1. No change can be made to table 2 without it being made to table 1. And then again, it will also ensure that any change in table 1 is also reflected in table 2. So those are the two benefits of enforcing the referential integrity. And then finally, questions from word processors concepts, all the way from definition of a word processor to inserting graphics and issues to do with printing. Then DTP concepts are also going to be tested, and then the daily experiences and the emerging issues. So at that point, I have reached the end of my presentation. So I'm now opening for questions to be asked by the candidates.
Okay, we could like to have questions from the schools. Kindly, if you have any question, show by raising up your hand so that we can give you permission to ask your question. Those who have questions, you can as well type your question and we will answer you. Kindly, could we get questions from the schools? We would like to have questions from the schools. Okay, there is a question from Muvuti Boys High School, and they're asking, how do you interpret a flow chart?
Yeah, this one involves writing a single code for the flow chart.
Okay, let us have a question from Katelembu Center of Excellence. Katelembu Center of Excellence, you can go ahead and ask your question. Katelembu Center of Excellence, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Okay, I'm asking.
Yes.
Are you required to give full explanation of a question?
As in, can you give an example of your question?
If you are asked to give a full explanation of a question. Okay, if you are asked to give questions like advantages of using LAN in an institution, LAN, can you give a full explanation?
A full explanation. If you are told to give the advantages there, like for example, you can be stating, a statement is give, let's say like phrases, like advantages of LAN. You can just give them in statement form. Again, you can also explain, you will be okay.
Okay, let us have a question from Katoloni Secondary School. Katoloni, you can go ahead and ask your question. Katoloni. Katoloni. Katoloni Secondary School. We can't get you. We are not able to hear you. Katoloni Secondary School. Katoloni Secondary School, we can't hear you. Katoloni Secondary School, we can't hear you. Katoloni, we can see that you are talking, but we can't hear you. Okay, Katoloni, I would like to request you to use another alternative and don't use the headphone microphone because we can't hear you. Okay, let us get a question from Mwindimbingu High School. Mwindimbingu High School, you can go ahead and ask your question. Mwindimbingu? Mwindimbingu High School? Mwindimbingu?
I have two questions.
Yes.
My first question is about in the question about the flowchart. So in Form 3, we learned some symbols we use in the programming, and there's some advanced symbols in the system development. Yes. So my question is, when the candidate is drawing the flowchart, if they use the advanced symbols in the system development, is the candidate penalized or is it allowed?
You are
and my second
okay.
You can go ahead.
My second question is about, we have networks. As most candidates know, we know three networks: the LAN, the MAN, and the WAN. And we do know there are two more networks, which are the campus area network and the wireless personal area network, which is also known as the Piconet. So if the candidate decides to use the other two, is he penalized or is it also allowed? Thank you.
So in the flowchart, remember that this is a program flowchart. There are two types of flowcharts. There's a program flowchart and there is a system flowchart. It is highly advisable that when you are doing a program flowchart, use the symbols for the program flowchart. That is what I can advise you for now. Use the symbols for the program flowchart, because now when you will be using the other symbols, now you will be taking yourself to a system flowchart. So on the part of networks, the main ones, those the types of networks, there are those three. There's the LAN, there's the MAN, and there's the WAN. Those others will fall within either of those.
Okay, let us have a question from Mumbuni Girls. Mumbuni Girls, you can go ahead and ask your question. Mumbuni Girls, you can go ahead and ask your question. Mumbuni Girls. Mumbuni Girls. Mumbuni Girls, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Okay, we are asking if in a loop control structure, if you put the start and stop, will you be penalized or will you get a mark? Thank you.
Which question now? Can you come again?
When describing a loop control structure,
yes,
using a diagram,
yes,
and then you put the start and the stop, will you be marked for?
The main interest of concern is where the loop comes in. That is where the interest is. So if you do the start and the stop, but the loop is correct, then you get your point.
Okay, there is a question from Voti Boys. They're asking, in the same question, I think that is about the flow chart. Okay, let us have a question from Changuli. Changuli, they're asking, list two programs that can be used by web developers.
So that's a content question in Form 3. So I would advise you to consult your teacher. Thank you.
Okay, let us have a question from Katoloni Secondary School. Katoloni Secondary School.
Hey.
Katoloni. Katoloni? Katoloni? We can't hear you. Okay, Katoloni, you can type your question and we'll answer you. Katoloni? Okay, let us have another question from Mumbuni Girls. Mumbuni Girls, you can go ahead and ask your question. Mumbuni Girls? Mumbuni Girls, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Okay, our question is when when the marking of paper 1 is done, question 16 would like to know how the marks are distributed. Like, are you marking per every tool that you're using, or maybe the flowchart? How are you distributing the marks?
So the marks are, okay, the marks are distributed as per the processes that are required or as per the steps that are required in the flowchart. Remember, in a flowchart, you will have the start and stop. In the same flowchart, you can have inputs that can be one or several. In the same flowchart, you can also have initialization, which can be either be there or not, depending on the type of the flowchart. And initialization is a process. In a flowchart, again, you will also expect decisions, because most flowcharts, if not a sequence flowchart, if it is a selection control structure flowchart or iteration structure control flowchart, definitely at that point you will have conditions which can be one or more. One or more, it's like in selection, whereby you apply the nested if or the case selection. Then again, in the same flowchart, you will have, like, for example, the processes. Processes are checked. If the flowchart has processes, are they there? Evidence of the processes. And again, the outputs, they are also checked. And the arrows, are you able to show the flow, the correct flow of your arrows? So all those things are checked, so that now you are able to have your marks. And then everything now, is it showing the correct logic? So your flowchart should be able to show all that, and they should be correctly done using the correct symbols for you to get your point.
Okay, let us have another question from Changuli Secondary School. Changuli, you can go ahead and ask your question.
My question is about topologies. When you are told to describe a topology and then you are not sure of the explanation, can you draw the structure and get marks?
Yeah, you can draw the structure and get marks, but it will be more okay if you draw and then you give the explanation. At that point, you will be sure of scoring all the marks. But drawing will also give you some marks.
Okay, let us get another question from Emmanuel. Emmanuel, you can go ahead and ask your question. Emmanuel. Okay, let us have a question from Katelembu Center of Excellence, where they're asking, is it a must you show the dry run in question 16 on your paper?
It is good for the dry run to be shown. You will find, like, let's say the question of the output is, let's say, like 5 marks. Dry run is of great importance. Show it.
Emmanuel, you can go ahead and ask your question. Emmanuel.
Okay.
Emmanuel, you can go ahead and ask your question.
My question is,
yes, go ahead.
Hello. My question is, when you are told to differentiate, for example, given analog and digital data signals, and you don't know how to give the definition terms, when you draw the diagrams, will you be given any marks?
You'll get some. You are okay, you will get some marks. So from Cataloni Secondary, whereby they are requesting to be told the difference between explain and illustrate. In both cases, you are given more information about a given point, but in illustrate, you will be using a diagram. But in explain, it's not a must that you use a diagram.
Okay, let us have a question from Mumbuni girls. Mumbuni girls, you can go ahead and ask your question. Mumbuni girls.
So at that point, I can see that there are no more questions that are coming. So I'd like to appreciate you for your cooperation, and may God bless you.